Hello, my name is John Cassidy Rice. I have the pleasure to be your host for this podcast. And this week we're exploring the exciting topic of clean language. I have Marian Way with me. Hiya, Marian.
Hello, John. How are you?
Thank you for joining us. So tell me a little bit about your journey before we get into what is clean language.
Oh, okay, my journey. I started my career as a maths teacher, which I left when my children were born. And then I had a whole load of weight to lose. So I joined Weight Watchers and I stayed with that organisation for many years, running local meetings and becoming a trainer and eventually writing the Weight Watchers programme.
Wow.
And then while I was doing that, I came across NLP. And so I went on a lot of NLP training, train the trainer and all that kind of thing. And then while I was doing that, I came across clean language. And when I came across clean language, I was kind of hooked into this thing that enabled people to really explore their inner world and come up with their own unique solutions without the need for me to remember lots of models, which was really quite a good thing. So I was not very good at remembering all the models of NLP, although I, thought they were great.
Yes. So somebody might have heard the word clean language or even see the title of the book, Clean Language. What does clean language mean?
Well, at its basic level, it's just taking the words that somebody uses and exploring those words with questions which have been stripped of assumption as much as possible, so that the person can go into their own world without the facilitator or the coach's assumptions and advice and judgments being in there. They can freely explore their own, we call it metaphor landscape.
Right. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So when you say assumptions, and let's say it's for example, a therapist working with a client, are you talking about the therapist getting past their own assumptions? Is that?
Yes, I am. I can give you a little example. I was talking to a doctor yesterday, and she said, so what if the patient comes in and says, "I'm dizzy, doctor," and I say, well, we would say, "Oh, what kind of dizzy?" And then is there anything else about that? And those would be clean questions to help the person to find out about their dizziness and to give the doctor a better description than they have already. And I said, so what would a trainee doctor say if a patient comes and says, "I'm dizzy, doctor"? They say, "Oh, is the room spinning?" So there's a huge assumption in there that the room might be spinning for that person, which may or may not be true. So that's what a person does naturally in our everyday language and our everyday mind. We just make things up all the time. We can't not do that. So somebody says dizzy, we go, "Oh, the room must be spinning," but it might not be. So if you ask what kind of dizzy, or is there anything else about that dizzy, then you find out the actual experience of the person instead of your made up experience that you're putting on them.
Okay, excellent. Because we all have sort of our maps of the world that we try to fit other people to, and the clean language is getting around that.
Yeah, it kind of keeps the two maps of the world separate. So you know that the map of the world of the client is the map of the world of the client, and it's not been kind of contaminated by all your ideas that you're inadvertently suggesting when you ask a question. If it's a leading question, you're kind of putting an idea into the person's head. Whereas if you refrain from doing that, then you know that what you've got is clean, if you see what I mean. It's free from your stuff.
Okay, excellent. So you mentioned metaphorical landscape, I think is the word you used.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean, clean language in itself is a neutral tool. So you can use it for anything. So you can use, we were talking about using it in the doctor's office, and you may or may not want to discover a metaphor for a symptom, for example.
Right.
When I was at Weight Watchers, I stayed with Weight Watchers a bit longer after I'd done all this training and found out about clean language, and we created a little process for people to use in a tiny amount of time when the leader was talking to them about what actions they were going to take next week. And so then it was a little bit more conversational. But if somebody comes to me as a as a client for kind of clean language coaching or clean language therapy, then what I'm doing is I'm helping them to translate their ordinary everyday experience, and in particular the concepts that they're using to describe that experience. So they might say, I'd like to be happier, or I'd like to have more confidence, and to translate that into a metaphor. So that's confidence like what? And then they'll say things like, well, it's like I've got a rod up the middle of me and it's shiny, and when that's there and in place, then I stand up straighter, and then something happens, a smile comes on my face, so that we get like an embodied metaphor. Or it might be that they've got, you know, something happening over here. I was doing some training yesterday. I was talking about my own stuff. Is I've got like a little boundary where food's still on food. I am a food that I like is kind of popping through a barrier, and I'm kind of grabbing it. So it's not on the inside of me, but it's still an embodied thing because my arms and hands are involved, and it's metaphorical.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So there seems to be this balance between being no assumptions and maybe creating a metaphor if it's appropriate.
Yes.
Where did all this come from?
It came from a man called David Grove. So he was a therapist working in the States, and very, very experimental guy. He knew about NLP, he knew about modeling, and he was looking for how do people respond to different questions. And so he experimented, and his aim was to get the client to pay attention to their own material, their own experience. So he took the questions that therapists normally use, like, oh, can you tell me a little bit more about that, or something like that. And he's like, okay, what assumptions are in there, or what will happen to the person's attention? So can you tell me a little bit more about that? There's lots of things for the client to process. Whereas if you take it down to, is there anything else about that? First of all, the attention stays with the client, and there's less words for them to process. So it's simpler, and then they can kind of go off on a search for their own information. And I mean, obviously, can you tell me a little bit more about that is not exactly a leading question. It's quite an open question, but even stripping those things down and making it plainer gives more chance that the client will get into their own material.
Excellent. So have you got examples where you may have used this for yourself?
So yeah, sometimes I use it with myself, and I write down my own questions and my own answers. So if I'm awake in the night thinking about something, it's much quicker to get up, write something down about what's going on, and then look at it and ask myself a question, and so on. But I've had two kind of major breakthroughs using Clean as a client. And the first was when I first came across Clean Language. I worked with a couple called Penny Tompkins and James Lawley, who developed David's work further. And I had a whole problem with resentment. I discovered through doing some work with them that I was resentful of pretty much everything. And so it's like that. And I'd been completely unaware of that, but it was a big thing. And the way that I discovered that the way it worked was, I don't know if you can, I just move my camera. I had this kind of ugly hand that would come out from my stomach. And when somebody said something I didn't like or wish they hadn't said, instead of saying something to them, which would be the clever thing, I would kind of mull it over in my mind and kind of wind it up a bit like this with a sort of ugliness to it. And then it would get too big, and perhaps it would turn into a piece of furniture or something like that. This kind of tiny little thing would get bigger and bigger. And then I'd put it up in this imaginary attic out of the way and carry on with my life. But something else would happen, and I'd do it again and go up big, and something else, and again and again. And then this pile would get so big, it would all come crashing out of me eventually, and I'd be all upset. And then, of course, I would start it over again. And what I discovered through doing that work, first of all, I discovered that there'd been some incidents in my childhood which had kind of created this resentment in the first place. But what I really discovered was that instead of winding my little thing this way, if I just flicked it the other way, and the flicking the other way represents really, really letting it go and going, oh, it doesn't matter, or saying something to the person and dealing with it and facing up to it instead of just kind of holding on to it. All it is a little flick the other way, and then there's no build up, there's nothing here. And so I think that was probably about almost 20 years ago that I did that, and I've never had that happen again.
Wow.
Now and again I catch myself doing the little windy uppy thing, but I think, oh, I'm doing that thing, and then I decide what to do about it.
That's a very elegant way of using metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. So and then about 2 years ago, I was still overweight and still, you know, on this weight loss thing going on. I mean, been yo-yoing and what have you over the years. And I did a piece of work with somebody about shame. Okay. And I discovered I had quite a lot of shame, and it was all in these little green pockets all around my body. And and one of the things about working with metaphor is really hard to remember, because you're working with metaphor, you're working at an unconscious level.
Yes.
So it's really hard for me to know. I was like, I remember the little green pockets, and then I remember signing up to see a naturopath, and now I'm 3 stone lighter, and it's really hard to go, what happened in that session? I really don't know. I can't remember. But something happened that made it okay for me to go and spend money on myself. And
it sounds like it can create a deep unconscious mind shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then, you know, other things that can happen with clean, it's expanded into every area, actually. So anything that you do, you can go, how could we do that more cleanly? And so it's now used in education, it's used in health, it's used in business, it's used in sales, it's used in interviewing, and lots of people all over the world have developed their own sort of clean applications based on the context they're in. So you can take the kind of basic idea and go, how can we make a clean version of X? Right. And so there's huge applications. In the last 5 years, I've been working with someone called Caitlin Walker. She and I are now business partners, and we've written, recently finished a book that we've written together called So You'd Like to Be Drama Free. And it's about, so the work that application that she brought to clean was around working with groups. Okay. So not just one-to-one, but in a group setting, using clean as a way to get people to get clearer communication between one another, and to sort of question with curiosity the things that people are saying, rather than making huge assumptions. Yes. And when we've done that work with groups, then the results of that are kind of phenomenal, because people start to do things like I was not challenging anyone. I was keeping all this resentment to myself. So when people find out they've got methods of asking questions, we've got a model called the clean feedback model, which enables people to give one another feedback without encroaching on their personality, you know, their persona.
Well, it's a real skill to be able to give good feedback, and most people give opinions, don't they? Yeah,
absolutely. So you can still give your opinion, but you need to, in the clean feedback model, you need to know what your evidence is. Yes. So you need to really clearly observe what's happened, and then you say that this is what you're making up about it. So, right. So if we just go back to the doctor example, then the doctor could say, so I've heard you say that you're dizzy, and what I'm making up is that the room is spinning. And then the person gets an opportunity to say, oh no, the room's not spinning. So your inference still comes out, but it comes out prefaced by, I know this is mine.
Right.
I know.
Wow, it sounds like a whole field's growing organically through this process.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And very international, and lots of exciting things happening in the world.
Yeah. So I'm guessing one of the questions somebody might have is that if you're doing this deep unconscious work, How would you know when it manifests itself? Because I think that's one of the things you indicated. Have you got an example of
well, I mean,
a case study?
sometimes I work with my clients. It seems to me like something has shifted within them as I've been doing the work. But of course, with any work, with any NLP, with anything that you do, you don't really know the results until they go home and they start living their life and things change. So many times people go off and you don't really know what's happened. But about a month ago, I got an email from a lady that I did some work with about 15 years ago. She had gone off to the doctor. She's had a broken wrist, and then she'd been left with a condition called RSD. And the doctor had said to her, you won't be able to use that wrist. And she refused to believe this. And so she was on an email group before we had Facebook, and she was on this email group that I belonged to. And she said, would anyone like to work with her long distance on this symptom that she had? And so we did, I don't know how many emails, but we just did it over email.
Okay.
For about 2 months.
Yes.
And when we had finished that, she had a lot more movement, like 70% movement came back in those 2 months. And I wrote a little blog post about it on my website. But about a month ago, she contacted me to say after that, she got complete movement. And she also felt like the work that we had done had influenced her in all sorts of areas of her life. Right. Because we weren't just working on her wrist. And again, I can't really remember the metaphors, but there were lots of metaphors over a 2-month period. And that's taking her into all kinds of patterns, limiting beliefs, all kinds of things that you can deal with NLP, but you just deal with it through the metaphor using clean language.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's nothing separate. Everything is connected.
Yes. Yeah, everything's connected. Yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah. Well, it's if somebody was interested in doing some clean language coaching with you, how would they contact you?
They can contact me on marian@cleanlearning.co.uk.
Excellent. And do you have a website?
Yeah, it's cleanlearning.co.uk.
Excellent. And when's the book coming out?
The book is already there. It's available on the book column on that website.
So it's on your website. They could get a...
Yeah, and there are a few other books. I've written a book called Clean Approaches for Coaches, if anyone's interested in using it as a coach. And Caitlin's written a book called From Contempt to Curiosity. And we've got another one that I've written with someone else, with James Lawley actually, called Insights in Space. So we've got lots of books, lots of courses, all kinds of things. Yeah.
You've been busy.
Yes. Yeah, a bit.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge and your insights.
Oh, you're welcome. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Excellent. So please do get in contact with Marian and grab a copy of her new book and indeed some of her other books. And got any questions, please do let us know. And can people contact you directly?
Yep, marian@cleanlearning.co.uk. Marian with an A, Marian.
Excellent. Thank you. Until next week, as we build this NLP community where we share and enhance each other's knowledge. Have a great week, and I'll see you soon.